And our final video for quiz number 1 is going to be about running for president, which is a process we simulated in class. So hopefully this will be very familiar to you. You should be continuing to take notes in the fill-in-the-blank packet. So the first step, of course, is the nomination. Basically, how do we choose who our candidates will be for each party? And this is basically controlled by the parties and the states. Parties will decide how many delegates to give to each state, and they will set the guidelines as to how the states can divide the delegates. So what that means is the Democratic Party is going to use about 2,000 delegates to their convention to decide who the nominee is going to be, and they're going to divide them up amongst the states. Now, it's not as exact as with the electoral votes. It's not just by population. They get to decide which states they think are more influential, and they'll give more delegates to those states. And then they'll also tell the states if they need to use a winner-take-all system where whoever wins the primary or caucus in their state gets all of that state's delegates, or if they can do it proportionally. And I will tell you that the Democrats, all of their primaries and caucuses are proportional, whereas the Republicans still use some winner-take-all states. Okay, so the parties decide how many delegates and how they will determine how the delegates are divided. And then the states will decide how to award those delegates, whether they're going to do a caucus or a primary. And then sometimes they can give some input as to whether it will be winner take all or proportional. So the first step is the nomination, controlled by both the parties and the states. And as I said, delegates are those who get to vote at the convention as to who the nominee will be. And they're generally prominent party members in the state chosen to represent the party at the national convention. And there are two ways for a state to decide how to award the caucus. We practiced both of these in class. To award the delegates. The first is a caucus, where we get a bunch of local party members together to decide how they're going to vote. And they do this in a big meeting, okay? So we'll have a meeting in a gym, and all the candidates will have a shot, and ultimately one will be the winner. And they'll do that in all the counties in the state, and then we'll combine those to get the results. A primary is just a direct ballot, where we just go in and vote on the ballot, and they total them up, and that's who wins the primary for the state. So those are the two ways a state can decide how to award their delegates. And there have been some changes throughout the years and traditions that affect how you could go about trying to win the nomination. First off, you have to focus on the early states like Iowa and New Hampshire, because if you win a caucus in Iowa or the primary in New Hampshire, or two other early states are Nevada and South Carolina, you are going to get media attention, and that's what you need most to be able to get momentum. You need to get attention so people will pay attention to you in the later states. So even a second or third place finish early on can then get you a chance to get enough coverage to propel you to win later. And then after those first 4 states that are on the calendar, then we have Super Tuesday, which is when a bunch of other states have their primaries and caucuses on the same day. It's usually in February. And if you do well on Super Tuesday, you're in much better shape to then continue on. So those are where you need to focus your attention early on. Some things that have come up, though, is that many more states have been wanting to get their attention of the candidates early on. So they're trying to move their primaries and caucuses earlier. So that's called front loading. But according to party rules, only Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada can come before Super Tuesday. In 2008, Michigan and Florida tried to move their primaries before Super Tuesday, and then they were penalized by their parties by taking away some of their delegates. So the parties are really trying to keep it limited to those first 4 states before Super Tuesday. But Indiana isn't even until May, and sometimes having your primary at the end gets you more attention if it's very close, like was the case in 2008 between Obama and Clinton. Now, many people say, why don't we make this a national primary where all states could have their primary on the same day? Well, the thing is, it's very expensive to mount a national campaign, so only those who have a ton of money would even have a chance. But there have been many times where somebody who's not very popular or known, such as like Bill Clinton, who wasn't very known but came in second at the New Hampshire primary, was then able to propel himself on to more fundraising and attention to win. So, many people prefer this early small states first and then more later on. Also, there's the debate over whether states should divide their delegates proportionally or do winner take all. The argument for winner take all is that the party winner is more clear early on. Proportional is it truly reflects how many people vote for each candidate. The downside to proportional is it sometimes takes a long time to get to the nominee for the party because it's so close, like it was the case with Obama and Clinton in 2008, and that cost the candidates a lot more money, but at the same time it got them more attention because people already knew McCain was the candidate, so they stopped paying attention to him, and the Republicans had done the winner-take-all. So there's different sides to it. So after we finish up the primaries and the caucuses, we know who our candidates are. We go to the step 2, which is the National Party Convention, where all those delegates from each state come together to officially elect the party nominee. But basically, they're generally pledged to the candidates before the convention because we already know how the states voted. So therefore, it's more of a formality. Some parties both use superdelegates, where they are party leaders who get to just cast their vote regardless, but there are only a few of those. So basically the nomination isn't a surprise anymore, but the point now is to get media coverage. And in the past, it used to cover the convention gavel to gavel, as it was called, from the beginning to the end, which was about 5 days. But now people don't really want to pay attention to something like that for so long, so only C-SPAN and CNN cover all of it, and then the primetime networks just kind of cover the big speeches. So really then, what's the point of the convention? They have to decide on and promote the party platform, which is the issues they believe in. They sometimes either announce the vice presidential nominee or formalize it with the big announcement. And then it's also to get press time for the important speeches. For example, sometimes up-and-coming members of the party will give a speech at the convention, and then they later will become maybe the nominee. For example, Clinton gave a speech in '88 and was the nominee in '92. Obama gave the speech in 2004 and was the nominee in 2008. It's not always the case, but sometimes it gets some notoriety for people. But really, it's time for the party to come together. Think about 2008, when Obama and Clinton had basically battled it out for months straight, and then all of a sudden Obama's the nominee, and they need Hillary and her voters' support. So this is time for them to come together and the loser to say, really remember, we're the same party and you should vote for our party come November. We do have independents who like to get nominated, and it's a very unique process, like me talking about third parties, because each state has its own procedure to get on the ballot in the state, and it's always by petition, but sometimes they only require 200 signatures, sometimes it requires 2% of the vote, which would be like 52,000 signatures. So third party members sometimes have a hard time getting on the ballot. They don't really have as much of a formal convention and primary process, they just have to get on by petition. And some examples of prominent third-party candidates are Ralph Nader for the Green Party, Ross Perot against Bush and Clinton in 1992, and Pat Buchanan for the a Republican splinter. So after we have our nominees and we announce them at the convention, then we get to the general election, which is in November. They first have debates leading up to them, which are really not as much as debates as they are kind of formalized speaking times. Basically, they're controlled by this nonpartisan commission on presidential debates, and they have to negotiate between the candidates to set the terms. People argue that these are very rehearsed and they're not very real debates, but in 2012 people said it was a little bit more harsh, and they actually got kind of uncomfortable with the way they were with one another. But candidates who do well in debates are at an advantage. In 2012, Obama kind of bombed his first debate, which was surprising to many people, and that gave Romney a boost. But ultimately, Obama recovered in the last few debates, and it was not really much of a struggle. And then we have the Electoral College for electing our president. So here's some facts about that. The number of votes in the Electoral College equals the number in the Senate, which is 100, plus the number in the House, which is 435, plus the District of Columbia, which is 3 from the 23rd Amendment, which totals 538. And you need to win the Electoral College vote, you need to have a majority, which isn't just more than the others, it's 50% plus 1. You have to actually hit the threshold of 50% plus 1, which for 538, that would be 270. So you need to have 270 votes to win the Electoral College. And here was the old map of the Electoral College from the old census, but now we have a new map, the 2012 Electoral College map, the largest states being California, Texas, and New York. The smallest number a state can have is 3. Indiana falls somewhere in the middle, maybe lower middle, with 11. But as we learned with reapportionment, more and more people are moving to the south and southwest, so that's where the electoral votes are going. If you look here, Texas had 34, they now have 38. California did stay the same, I guess. Let's look at New Mexico. the same. Arizona gained 1. Utah and Nevada each gained 1. Okay, that was a little back and forth, sorry. So, for the Electoral College stage, everyone gets to give their popular vote on the first Tuesday of the first full week in November. But you're actually not voting for the candidate. You're voting for the elector who's going to be assigned to the candidate you choose. So, in order to get a state's number of electors, you take their number of representatives plus 2 senators. So, Indiana has 9 representatives and 2 senators, which makes 11. California has 55, North Dakota has 3, to show you the range. So, in order to become an elector, you're usually a long-time party worker. And so you're a member of the party that's going to be choosing the candidate. So the Democrats have 11 electors in Indiana, and the Republicans have 11 electors. And because they're loyal party members, then they're expected to cast their electoral vote for the party's candidate if their party's candidate wins the popular vote. So both the Republicans and Democrats will have 11 electors ready in Indiana in case their party wins the majority of the popular vote, and the same is true in other states. People wonder, well, what if an elector decides to change their mind and vote against what the popular vote says? Well, in our entire history, no faithless elector, a person who doesn't vote for the state's popular vote winner, has ever cast the deciding vote. We've had a few people who've changed their votes, but only to make a statement, not to actually affect the results of the election. So on Election Day, these are kind of the old ballots from 2008. Say in Indiana you were voting for Barack Obama and his Vice President Joe Biden. You were actually voting for the 11 Democratic electors that would vote for him in the Electoral College. Same goes for John McCain. If you were voting for John McCain and Sarah Palin, you would have voted for the 11 Republican electors that would vote for them in the Electoral College. And the biggest thing to know about the Electoral College is that it's a winner-take-all system, which means that whoever gets the majority of the popular vote in the state gets all of the electoral votes for the state. It's winner-take-all. There are 2 exceptions with Nebraska and Maine because they split their electoral votes. So on Election Day, they'll look at each state's popular vote total and see who wins and give that state's electoral votes to the candidate who wins. And the first candidate to get 270 electoral votes wins the election and the presidency. There are some glitches, though. If there's a plurality, meaning if no one in the Electoral College gets to 270, the 50% plus 1 majority, then it goes to the House of Representatives to choose our president and the Senate to choose the vice president. And this has happened before. He's mostly known for the 1824 election of Andrew Jackson. And this generally happens more when there are 3 candidates, because then they more divide the votes in the Electoral College, and that's what make it less likely for somebody to get to 270. And also, a candidate could win the popular vote but not win the electoral vote, and this has happened 4 times in our nation's history, most recently with Bush versus Gore. So those are 2 big concerns with the Electoral College vote. But mostly it's important to know that it is a winner-take-all system. In 2008, more people in Indiana voted for Obama, so he got Indiana's 11 electoral votes. But in 2012, more people voted for Romney, so Romney got Indiana's 11 electoral votes. And the way this system is really significant because it affects how our candidates campaign. The states with a large number of electoral votes get more campaigning, but also if a state's certain to be red or blue, they get very little attention. So California, for example, has a lot of electoral votes, but it's pretty likely to be blue, so they don't get that much campaigning. Also, states that are swing states, meaning that their popular vote is close to 50-50, they get the most attention. So there's about 10 to 11 swing states in our country that really get the majority of the attention. So here are the results from 2008, which was the very contentious election where this is the popular vote total. Al Gore got 50.5% of the popular vote, and I take it back. I'm not reading that right, but this is the electoral vote. I'm sorry, this is the popular vote. Al Gore got 48 point something% of the popular vote, and George W. Bush got 47.9%, which means that Al Gore got more, but George Bush won the electoral vote with 271 to 268. But here's the 2008 results. Swing states are typically Ohio, Missouri, North Carolina, Florida, Colorado, Nevada, things like that. So there's our summary of how a president becomes elected. You can use these notes to help you make your diagram.